Did you hear? Kullervo's hold can be sighted just off the mainland. The place is steeped in anger, sorrow, and fear, so you only need to wait for one of our king's darker moods. My archives note that the island was first formed when a ball of fire descended from the sky. It bored a hole straight through the ground, and from the tainted debris, a dungeon spontaneously arose, complete with warden to berate its sole prisoner, the Warframe Kullervo, for his many crimes.
On a rather ordinary day in Duviri, a day that felt exactly the same as every other day, a ball of fire rained down from the sky. The fire crashed and cooled and became a new island. It had been such a long time since a new island appeared in Duviri, yet upon that island resided only 2 new cast members, the warden and his prisoner, Kullervo. Kullervo's island appears only during the sorrow, anger, and fear spirals in Duviri, for the story of Kullervo is one of immeasurable failure, revenge, and tragedy.
Duviri has changed. You may have your freedom, but a new prisoner has come amongst us. A tormented soul. This dark day is his as much as mine. I understand how the Tams feel. Lost and listless. Be kind, Drifter. Bring them home.
Kullervo's namesake comes from the Kalevala, the epic poem of Finland. You may have heard of other epics, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, Beowulf, or the sagas, Eddas, and skaldic poetry of Norse culture. The Kalevala is an epic that follows from the beginning of the universe to the birth of the epic hero Wainamoinen. The early runes of the Kalevala feature primarily no stories of war.
Centurions and legates, a child's idea of strength. Break his toys and scatter them. Make his wealth your own.
Rather, interlacing tactful instructions on how to grow food and forage resources. It gives practical advice to the people who would hear the poem being sung in its own time. That is, until the tales of Wainamoinen and his adventures become more interlaced with the tales of the ordinary people around him, often leaving Wainamoinen entirely out of the epic for which he is the hero. Such as when Ilmarinen, the blacksmith, forged the mythical Sampo for a chance at getting married, only for the maiden to reject him, and thus teaching the listeners to not force their daughters into wedlock. Then there is Lemminkainen, the unfaithful and scatterbrained romantic, who decides to break his marriage vow and go pillaging just because his wife broke her vow to not go dancing with the other women in town, who then, whilst trying to court a new bride, stupidly dies in a river after getting bit by a snake. Followed by an entire rune starring Lemminkainen's mother as she fishes his body parts from the river and petitions the goddess of veins, Suonetar, to sew Lemminkainen's pieces back together. The Kalevala is freaking metal as hell, and filled with all kinds of stories with unique and unexpected protagonists. This, of course, brings us to Kullervo, who would become Ilmarinen's hapless and ill-fated slave. Rune 31. Let us summarize the story of Kullervo, son of evil. At a time long ago, there was a merchant shepherd named Untamuonen and a farmer named Kalerwonen. Though neither knew it, Kalerwonen and Untamuonen were long-lost brothers. Kalerwonen stole a basket of fish from Untamuonen, and Untamuonen allowed his sheep to eat Kalerwonen's crops. The conflict grew into a great feud, until one day Untamuonen settled the feud by amassing an army and slaughtering Kalerwonen's entire clan, leaving only young Untamala, Kalerwonen's sister, who was pregnant despite being a virgin. Untamala's child would be named Kullervo, and even as a baby he possessed extraordinary strength and a penchant for violence. As soon as Kullervo could walk and speak, he vowed to take vengeance on Untamuonen's clan. Untamuonen responds by drowning, burning, and hanging Kullervo for 3 days each, and each time the infant Kullervo survived, because Kullervo cannot be killed. Untamoinen instead tries to win over Kullervo with employment once he is a boy. Yet every job Untamoinen gives, Kullervo sabotages and destroys whatever was of value to Untamoinen. Thus, Untamoinen sells the boy Kullervo to the legendary blacksmith Ilmarinen, trading him for a variety of cheap and rusty farm tools. Rune 32. As a slave to Ilmarinen, Kullervo changes his attitude significantly. He is eager to help out. Ilmarinen's wife tasks Kullervo with shepherding her flock of cattle as they graze in the forest. She bakes him a buttery loaf of bread and reminds him only to eat it later in the day, then sings a charm to protect him and the herd while they are out. Rune 33. Kullervo sets out with the flock of cattle, deftly guiding them safely away from any bears and wolves that might do them harm. He works diligently and waits until the instructed time to eat his bread loaf. To slice it, he takes out his knife, the only heirloom he has left from his mother and clan, slices the loaf in half to inspect it, only for his mother's knife to shatter on a stone hidden inside the loaf. The wife of Ilmarinen had played this trick on the poor slave Kullervo, thinking to wound his teeth, but instead took something worth much more. Kullervo, thus enraged, forges a plan to take his revenge on this evil woman. He runs the herd of cattle to the nearby wolves and bears. He becomes a shepherd to the beasts, using his magic to transform the wolves and bears to take the appearance of cattle, and then herds the monsters back to the wife's stable. The wife expresses her thanks for Kullervo's return with her flock unharmed. She begins to milk the cattle, only for the spell to drop as she is quickly fell upon by hungry wolves and bears. She begs Kullervo's forgiveness, asking him to drop the evil spell, and Kullervo refuses. Rune 34. Having killed Ilmarinen's wife, Kullervo flees, lamenting his lack of fortune to an old woman he meets on the road. The woman reveals that his mother, Untamala, and his uncle, Kalarvonen, were still alive. They reside in the Northland, and thus Kullervo seeks them out and finds them, only to discover a new misfortune. Kullervo had a sister, but she is lost and likely dead. Rune 35. Now reunited with his family, Kullervo has a new problem. His great physical strength makes him unfit for manual labor. When he goes fishing, he tears the fish nets when he pulls on them. He smashes the fish to paste as he rows the fishing boat. He breaks the boat's oars from rowing too hard. Instead, he is sent to pay the tax tribute to the local lord. Once the job is complete, as he rides the sled back home, he comes across a beautiful woman out in the snowy wilderness. He begins to woo this woman, calling out to her and demanding that she join him on the sled, no matter how many times she refuses. As her denials persist, he forcibly sits her on the sled, then bribes her with expensive gifts. The poem chastises Kullervo for using such deceitful methods as they spend the night together. The next morning, the woman asks who is this man that has accosted her. He reveals himself to be a son of Kalarvonen's family, son of Untamala. This woman then says to Kullervo that she was Untamala's lost daughter. She has been lost in the mountains whilst gathering food, but no matter how many times she tried, she could not let herself die. Now, having realized the heinous act committed with her brother, she dashed from the sled and tossed herself into the frigid river. Kullervo, understanding that his heinous flirtation has killed his sister, now returns home to confess his guilt to Untamala and Kullervo, his mother and father. Untamala pleads with Kullervo not to kill himself so that one of her children may live. Time will heal the wounds of his guilt, but Kullervo refuses. Decides instead that the only way to atone for his grief is to complete his family's feud against Untamoinen. Rune 36. As Kullervo leaves his family home, he addresses his clan, asking each of them if they will mourn him once he dies in battle. They all refuse to mourn the evil and vengeful Kullervo who abandons them. He leaves for battle regardless of their admonishment. As he is away pillaging villages in search of Untamoinen, messengers find him to relay that his family is dying one by one. Kullervo refuses to return home to give them funeral rites until his mother dies. Lamenting his inability to leave the battlefield while Untamoinen lives, Kullervo, in his grief, begs Ukko, the god of storms, for a weapon to finish the task of his revenge. Ukko beseeched this plea with a magic broadsword. Only then does Kullervo return home, to find that it is cold and empty. His mother's ghost appears and tells him to travel to the far edge of the forest, where the wood nymphs will celebrate his return. Once arrived, Kullervo instead finds that the entire forest weeps in his deceased sister's voice. Kullervo then turns to the sword of Ukko and asks if it wants to spill Kullervo's blood. The sword whispers in reply, yes, it does. It has drank the blood of the righteous and worthy for Kullervo's sake. Why should it not also slay the wicked Kullervo? Hearing Ukko's magic broadsword so excited to take his life, Kullervo points the blade at his own chest and strikes through the heart. Thus Kullervo dies, finally ending his evil deeds, as the poet, singing, teaches us the lesson of Kullervo's story. O ye many unborn nations, never evil nurse your children, never give them out to strangers, never trust them to the foolish. If the child is not well nurtured, is not rocked and led uprightly, though he grow to years of manhood, bear a strong and shapely body, he will never know discretion, never eat the bread of honor, never drink the cup of wisdom. To summarize, the Kalevala here asserts that strength and violence will never make your sons into a good man. You must show your children love, teach them morality, and encourage them to seek wisdom. Only then will you keep them from being like Kullervo.
In these easy times of evil, let us sing of Kullervo. Sing the sorrows of his birthright, sing them twice and then a third time. First he found his father's namesake, sought from him a loving father. Also found his mother's namesake, sought from her a loving mother. Bastard son of highest ruler, son of noble executor, hidden son of lower smithy, son of lower Archimedean, lawless son of sinful lovers, spake them both for one another. Will not have this lowborn creature, will not have him as a child, will not have him in our household, not this dirty gilded soldier. Spake them both as they continued, toss him back with devil children. Thus rejected Kullervo, and took in hand the sword of Ukko. Ukko, father of the storm wind, vain the trusty magic broadsword. Now this Hisi blade of evil whispered words to sweet Kullervo, words of vengeance for Kullervo. Made him fall upon the sword blade, fall a second and a third time. Gave his body to the craftsman, planted seedling of the Helminth. Born a second time as Warframe. Still remembered being highborn, still remembered Kullervo, vowing vengeance for this bastard as the Warframe Kullervo. cut his father and his mother, gold his namesake, now his victim. Turned to crimson in the lake blood. Thus the tale of Kullervo has dispensed with all the singing, till the Naga drums are pounding songs of revolution. Till the lotus blooms with child, ere the warden holds him hostage.
The Kalevala, as a poem that predates the written word, was memorized and sung by poets for generations. But the story of the Warframe Kullervo is told in two ways: the condemnations of the warden and the songs of the blue children.
That warden is a repugnant, self-righteous man, speaking as though he too came from beyond the Zariman, but deep down, both he and I are well aware he is of Duviri, of the Void. We know our own.
The warden walks the player through the events which earned the Warframe his hatred. But who is the warden? How can he remember these crimes, and what gives him the right to pass judgment? From his hair, his voice, and his general demeanor, it is quickly revealed that the warden is what remains of Balus, the Orokin that created the Warframes, after his death at the hands of the Tenno and the Lotus. While we dealt with the sudden appearance of the man in the wall, Balus must have fallen from the deck of the Pragasa, slipping into the massive void gate Balus had opened, just as the last remnants of his consciousness slipped out with his final breath. This would not be the first time that conceptual embodiment, the principle by which consciousness in the presence of void energy, creating complex matter and being, would bring a person back to life. During the Echoes of the Zariman, we discovered that the Holdfast crew were recreations, not the original crew, but facsimiles created by their consciousnesses in the void as each of them lost their lives. Back in Duviri, Coral, Mathilla's daughter, also expressed to the Drifter that she remembers not always having been Coral. We speculate that she, and potentially everyone else in Duviri, had once been the colonists aboard the Zariman. Now, Balus may have died, but his consciousness has been reborn, incomplete, but his hatred intact. The warden now remembers Kullervo, the warframe that inspired the Night of Naga Drums, and though he never raised a blade, he empowered the Lotus to lead the Tenno Rebellion and bring an end to the Orokin Empire.
You cannot improve a criminal nature. You may as well be sculpting angels out of dung. You, Kullervo, thought an executor's favor was a thing to be stolen and worn. You spilled precious Orokin blood before seeking the executor out for approval. Hated Kullervo, did you truly believe he could love you? You are forevermore a low murderer. The brats are at their chanting. Were the king himself not a child, I would have them all hung.
The Warframe Kullervo is here charged with murdering Orokin citizens on his path to gain an audience with an executor, one of the seven, the highest rulers of the Orokin Empire. In this sentencing, Kullervo is depicted as attempting to use violence to gain approval and status from the executor, but the path of murder stopped short of the executor himself. Thus, the warden ridicules Kullervo for thinking that one could extort love from an executor and thus be forgiven for the crimes just committed. Once Kullervo had failed, more guards were called, and Kullervo is captured.
You witnessed the slaughter as the Orokin eradicated your defective, demented brothers and sisters, and did nothing to aid them. choosing to tremble in your cowardly seclusion. A traitor twice over. Kullervo, bloody-handed, I charge you with cowardice. You crave the sun, Kullervo, but the sun is mine. Squat in your dull-stone prison and sob.
Assuming that these charges are presented to us in chronological order, this decision suggests that there was a time, in the early years of the experiments, that there was a culling of the early attempts to transform Dax soldiers into warframes. We already know from the sacrifice, or the story excerpt of Rhino Prime's codex, that the early warframes could turn into feral, bestial things. It was their union with the Tenno that calmed this aspect of their nature. Despite his anger, Kullervo made no uproar, simply stayed in his jail cell, and he was mocked for it. It is so interesting to note the little aside the warden adds here, demonstrating how Kullervo was mocked in captivity, yet the warden makes the claim that he owns the sun. This is clearly a memory left over from Ballas, who, during the events of the New War, used the sentient mothership Pragasa in an attempt to devour the sun of the Origin system. Ballas was defeated, of course, but the warden clearly hasn't learned from the mistake of Ballas's own hubris.
The Archimedean Ainiki, your mother, lived. And you, like the vermin you are, scurried after her. In butchering the Dax, who the executors charged with taking you into just custody, you, laughably, managed to kill the very woman you came to rescue. The third charge. Flight from just custody. Kullervo. His mother, Ainiki, named him well. Cursed from the moment of his creation.
Having been ridiculed for failing to act in defense of the other warframes, Kullervo freed himself from captivity. The people in the Archimedean class of Oricon society were responsible for the invention and design of new technologies, as well as overseeing their construction. We, as Tenno seeking out warframe blueprints, often encounter the names of Archimedeans who were responsible for the development of different warframe designs. One could see this relationship between designer and creation as a metaphorical mother and child. Ainiki is another name from the Kalevala. Ainiki was the sister of Lemminkainen mentioned previously. Here, the warden ridicules the very idea that Kullervo was in fact born to Archimedean Ainiki. The allusion to the name Ainiki does little to reveal the relationship between the Archimedean and Kullervo. A more fitting name may have been Untamala, who as a virgin miraculously gave birth to Kullervo, but we must remember the Oricon's religious concept of the vain faith. Symmetry, variation, and golden filigree were their source of truth as a cultural narrative that justifies rulership. To them, appearances are more true than facts. Kullervo's appearance as a warframe is thus proof enough that he cannot be recognized as Ainiki's son and the Executor's son, even if everyone involved knows better. He sought out his mother after his escape, seeking refuge in the last family he had, thinking she would remember him and love him. He was pursued and, tragically, Archimedean Ainiki was killed in the crossfire between Kullervo and the Dax bloodhounds. What is confusing about this line about Kullervo's name is that the word Kullervo is derived from the word kulta, meaning gold. The name is far from cursed. It is a name befitting an Oricon if there ever were one. I have 4 sources corroborating that translation. I did, however, find that dictionary.com and collinsdictionary.com describe the word Kullervo as a noun meaning an enslaved person who dies by suicide. Without knowing the context that Kullervo is a proper name and a character, one could easily be tricked into thinking this is a definition of a word rather than a strange encyclopedia-type entry on a dictionary website. I believe this line was likely written by someone at DE who didn't do their due diligence for looking up the etymology of the name. From my perspective, the Warden should instead be angry at the name for pretending to be Orokin, whilst we know that the name would have been a subtle hint at Kullervo's noble lineage.
Upon the arrival of the wretched Tenno, you struck. Out of what? A desire for redemption? You thought to strike the Orokin where it hurt. Their laboratories, their edifices of government, their homes. To distract, to buy time. Idiot. You are charged with treason. Again and again, Kullervo revealed the slaughter-drunk beast he was. Again and again, I locked him away.
Having escaped from captivity with nowhere else to turn, Kullervo became a secret presence among the new generation of Warframes, used their existence to gain access where he otherwise could not go, destroying Orokin infrastructure wherever he could, taking out his anger on the society that wronged him. Whenever captured, he would simply escape again.
You saw the new generation of your kind. And the Tenno whose deviltry blent with theirs. And you began to whisper corruption into their ears, weave dark thoughts through the coils of their minds, incepting, as is your wont, chaos and disaster. You are charged with espionage. The fools sought oblivion. As if I could not pursue him wherever he went. I, his conscience, his jailer.
Exactly how did Kullervo achieve this espionage? Warframes are known to lack the ability to speak, but somehow the Tenno, living as Warframes without their memories of the Zeramin, were communicating with one another. We know the Tenno rebellion to be the result of the Lotus leading the downfall of the Orokin Empire, the sentient mimic Nata first replacing Margulis, Balas's love, who was herself sentenced to death for treason, then executed a sabotage of the Orokin Empire in preparation for the Sentient's return after the Old War. But the Lotus, having learned to love the Tenno as her own children, chose instead to lead the Tenno and their Warframes to live freely, rather than being disposed of according to the Sentient's plan. From what we knew before, the Lotus was the sole architect of this rebellion, and guided the entire course of events leading up to the Night of Naga Drums, the name for the sequence of events wherein the Warframes massacred Orokin leadership and destroyed their society from top to bottom. However, these crimes of Kullervo suggest that he had a role to play in all of this, that Kullervo was responsible for inspiring the idea that the Warframes could rebel and overthrow the Orokin Empire in the first place.
The night of the Naga Drums. Your incepted chaos bloomed, and the beautiful gilded empire fell. Were you entirely responsible? Of course not. You are, after all, a fool. But one need not be entirely responsible for the murder of an empire to be punished for their role in it. And punished you shall be, for a second count of treason. See where he rots, the mother killer, the betrayer, the ingrate.
There is a concept in the study of logic which becomes deeply important to jurisprudence, the philosophy of law. The idea is the word cause. Causes can be separated into many kinds, but the relevant ones to discuss here is the difference between a sufficient and a necessary cause. A necessary cause is something that, in its absence, would prevent the effect or outcome from occurring. A sufficient cause is something that, on its own, ensures the effect or outcome will will occur. A sufficient cause is a higher order of cause because it requires nothing else to prove guilt. If a Warframe holds a gun, pulls the trigger, and fires on a Corpus crewman, the act of firing the gun is a sufficient cause for the death and murder of that Corpus crewman. If you break down that sufficient cause into all of its constituent parts, the gun, the aiming, the skill of shooting, etc., then you have what is called a jointly sufficient cause. All of the smaller causes are parts of one cause that is solely sufficient for the crime. A necessary cause is something that, on its own, is not enough to create the effect, but is, as the name suggests, necessary for the effect to occur. Without the necessary causes, in the context of crime, no crime would have occurred. Therefore, a person need not be entirely responsible for every aspect of a crime to also be guilty of a crime. If your own guilt is necessary for the crime to have happened at all, then you would also be guilty. For example, in the context of rebellion, if you hold a position of authority, then incite a group of people to anger even if using a positive value like defending your country, encourage those people to arm themselves and be ready to fight, gather those people en masse at a single location, and then direct them to join you by marching on a nation's capital, we could say that the effect of a large group of armed violent people marching on a nation's capital would not have occurred without the actions of that authority figure. The authority figure in this example is not solely responsible. All of those people also had to choose to listen to and follow the direction and implications of the authority figure. That authority figure's actions are, however, a necessary cause that, when taken with the actions of the people who carry out the rebellion, are jointly sufficient for the crime of rebellion. In Kullervo's case, he is accused of incepting the idea of Tenno rebellion against the Orokin in the traditional way, encouraging, arguing, and convincing people to stage a rebellion against the Orokin fascists. Perhaps Kullervo managed an audience with Nata. Perhaps he is the reason the Lotus thought to lead the Tenno rebellion in the first place.
As the Empire burned, you found the one executor you coveted and despised most. You presumed to raise your foul hand against him, one of the seven. But he did not die so readily as you had hoped. Thus, I lay upon your wretched head your ultimate crime, attempted regicide. And with it, your punishment, and the Executor's eternal vengeance. Society produces filth. We do not rehabilitate it. We hide it away to stink and fester out of the sight of decent folk.
Here the Warden wades once again into the philosophy of law, and more specifically the ethical questions of the purpose that prisons play in society, showing once again the Orokin's classist bigotry. The Warden describes criminals as filth, asserting that criminals are not people, nor worthy of rehabilitation. There are three predominant goals of imprisonment in the philosophy of law: rehabilitation, punishment, and isolation. Here, the Warden asserts isolation is the Orokin's guiding principle for imprisonment, existing only to separate and remove the person labeled criminal away from society, removing any perceived risk and leaving it to rot out of sight and out of mind of the good people not labeled criminals. People speak to this goal of imprisonment by appealing to the need to keep violent people away from the vulnerable. But if this were the only reason, then why do societies routinely imprison people for non-violent crimes, or for themselves being the victims of criminal abuse, such as in drug trafficking and human trafficking, where the possession of drugs or working as a prostitute are punished more frequently than the sale and coercion of those people under threat of violence? Punishment is the idea that crimes are harmful to society, and anything that harms the state is also immoral. Criminals thus deserve punishment because they are immoral people, whether by using a religious argument and making the state the agent of God's divine punishment, or using a secular humanist argument by saying punishment is necessary to bring justice to the harmed parties. The punishment is its own goal and needs no further justification. In this category, you you will often see people appeal to deterrence as a further justification. But even if studies showed that punishment is a successful deterrent to crime, this view fails to account for how being given the moral label of criminal changes a person's opportunity to rejoin society and pursue fulfilling their base needs. The harm that imprisonment does to a person's mental health and the status of being socially ostracized for having been labeled a criminal even after serving your punishment often guarantees that person will remain a criminal for life. This idea of deterrence, of doing what actually reduces the prevalence of crime and the cycles of harm, is what leads people to the idea of rehabilitation as the goal. It is the idea that the warden explicitly denies as the purpose of a system of justice. Do you know what actually goes a long way in preventing a person from choosing criminal behavior? Shelter, safety, enough food to eat, and hope for the future. So long as there is unemployment and poverty, so long as normal, polite society fails to provide for a person's needs, those people will find another way to survive. Now, I understand that the intersection of criminality and morality is not simple. I am not under the naive impression that solving unemployment and poverty will also solve immorality and crime, but when we look at Kullervo and listen to the warden reject the very idea of alleviating the problem at all, we should be left to wonder about whether imprisonment serves any purpose at all. However, turn your attention to the collapsed jail cell filled with dirt and rubble, which indicates that the warden had not succeeded in keeping Kullervo imprisoned. As the night of Naga drums raged on, Kullervo took this as an opportunity to take his final revenge against the executor he chased all those years ago. But he failed. The unnamed executor escaped him. To this, the warden once again boasts on his continued imprisonment of Kullervo, but at least one version of the Warframe is free. I would like to think that this Kullervo is the one that can join us in the Origin system, the one we restored in the Tenno's Foundry. As we approach the warden, he will reflect on the various sights of Duviri from atop his gilded throne, mocking and disparaging as always.
Do not block my light.
This is the first notable quote from the warden because it is a direct allusion to one of the many, likely ahistorical stories of Diogenes. Diogenes was the progenitor of the Cynic school of Hellenist philosophy. Cynicism was characterized by a rejection of nomos, law, custom, the social norms of the city-state, as the source of ethics and virtue for the individual, as well as a rejection of comfort generally. Cynicism instead emphasized physis, one's nature as an animal, to be that source of virtue, emphasizing an ethics that embraced all emotions and physical urges life had to offer, even if they were unpleasant, difficult, or problematic. Stories of Diogenes became a cornerstone of the early Cynics, one in which he chose homelessness by living in an overturned pot on the side of the road, one in which he makes fun of the philosophers of his time for defining humanity as featherless bipeds by running out to pluck a living chicken clean of feathers, then throwing it into the middle of the room. Another in which he loudly cursed a water cup for being a tyrant after witnessing a young boy drink directly from a river with his lips. Still another wherein he ate food while walking the streets of the marketplace, a massive social faux pas in Athens. The story for which Diogenes is most famous, however, is a story in which Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia, paid him a visit to offer a tribute to the most famous sophist. When Alexander asked Diogenes what he would like to receive, Diogenes replied, "For you to stop blocking my sunlight." Alexander complied. He stepped aside, later saying to his attendants, "If I were not Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes." Of these stories of Diogenes, the vast majority of them are likely to be cheeky fables developed by his followers to emphasize a rejection of the inherent authority of society in favor of something that is naturally fulfilling to one's life, yet also in a way that was not hedonistic, as pleasure was but one aspect of living, thus giving pleasure higher priority would have been unnatural. These words, however, are poison in the mouth of the Warden. The Warden is one that asserts and upholds social norms, and has dedicated his entire existence to the imprisonment and torture of one who was successful in eradicating an ignoble and virtueless society.
Is the wretch howling again? Every day he suffers afresh. And so, my purpose is fulfilled. Happy am I.
The Warden spends his days gloating. He revels in his successful imprisonment of Kullervo, yet he is somehow blinded to the state of that final jail cell, ignorant that his prisoner escaped long ago.
Do not eye me so venomously. I do not know you. What are you? Beggar? Lunatic or monarch clad in rags? Ugh. Trouble me not, Chimera.
Here the Warden is rejecting us for not conforming to social norms, disrespecting us for not taking power when we can, as Ballas would. They are aware of the Drifter's status as both the true ruler of Duviri and its wayward prisoner seeking to escape the void. To the Warden, to willingly abdicate political power, to willingly not be motivated by control over the common man, is equivalent to lacking sanity. As an Orokin, the very idea that an individual person could be both of the ruling and common classes is like being a mixed species, a chimera. The embodiment of the bigotry and dehumanization that rulers in fascist aesthetics try to present as scientific facts. The Warden sees us with hatred and disgust, but is willing to give us an audience with Kullervo, thinking he will be entertained by pitting us against one another. But the Warframes, too, are a kind of chimera.
I keep him locked up here for his own safety, and that of all Duviri. Care to find out why? The beast is loose, intent once again on mindless slaughter. Put it down, that both the innocent and the dead may sleep peacefully.
Just as Ballas miscalculated by allowing the Tenno to interact with Excalibur Umbra, the Warden makes the same mistake.
He feels your wrath, Drifter. Yes, continue. Tame his.
Allowing the Drifter to heal the suffering in Kullervo's heart, to calm his anger by honoring him, and grant peace to the turmoil in his heart. Lucky for us, the Warden is not the only one who gets to tell Kullervo's story.
This now tired spectacle no longer delights mine eyes. End this, cat's paw.
As we will soon see, being caught between social classes, caught between the dynamics of power, freedom, and imprisonment, is something the Drifter and Kullervo share in common.
Kullervo kneeling? What did this Drifter do to deserve your respect? Do you think you've won? Well, answer me! Answer me! Children. Idiot children who clap and cheer. What is he to them?
Who the Warden is should lead the player to question the reliability of the narrator. What extent of these crimes are we to consider true, even if true were his actions truly unjustified? To the children of Duviri, Kullervo is a kindred spirit, a wayward child finding his way in a world that ripped him from the bosom of a loving home. To fill the missing pieces in these politically convenient crimes against the Seven, we must listen to Duviri's children sing the song of Kullervo. The Blue children recount Kullervo's tale by singing a rhythmic poem. In doing so, the children keep much more in line with the tradition of the Kalevala. However, the children have scattered themselves about the island. The canonical order of the cantos is intentionally vague. Therefore, we must attempt to keep the whole of the story in mind all at once. Still, I have arranged the stanzas in such a way, as best I can, to present the story of the Warframe Kullervo as it unfolded from his perspective.
Kullervo, warrior born, from his mother's breast he was torn, doomed to go wandering all forlorn. Kullervo, Kullervo, made to mourn. Kullervo, Kullervo, sworn to the sword, sweated and slaved for the head of the horde, bruised and bludgeoned and scarred and gored. Kullervo, Kullervo, warriors warred.
These stanzas tell of Kullervo's birth, taken away from his mother and being given over to the class of Dax warriors.
Kullervo, Kullervo, burdens he bore. Many the woes and horrors he saw. Tyrants and conquerors ravaging the poor. Kullervo, Kullervo, witness to war.
Kullervo, Kullervo, broke like a flood. Ripped and he ravaged with a slash-sliced thud. Many lay headless, armless in the mud. Kullervo, Kullervo, bathed in blood.
Kullervo, Kullervo stood all alone, over the graves of the ones he'd known. Homestead warmth turned to ashes and bone. Kullervo, Kullervo, cold as a stone.
Next, we are told of Kullervo's life as a Dax, how he was made to commit great atrocities in the name of his Orokin rulers. His own acts as a warrior left him empty, prideless, and emotionally broken.
Kullervo, Kullervo, ragged and thin, tracked back the path so steeped in sin, all the way back where it did begin. Kullervo, Kullervo, sought for his kin. Kullervo, Kullervo, stranger to mirth, spoke with the ragged who toiled in the earth, learned of the truth of the days of his birth. Kullervo, Kullervo, what was he worth?
Here we see Kullervo after deserting his station as a Dax warrior. He wandered to what he must have been told was his hometown. There he learned of Einike, his mother, and sought her out. Also learned of his father, only to be rejected by both. And so he left, even more dejected and alone.
Kullervo, Kullervo, far he strayed. Lips to the steel he blessed and prayed. Whispered promises that boy made. Kullervo, Kullervo, friend to the blade. Kullervo, Kullervo, long did he weep. In his own breast his sword drove deep, down to the dark and a merciful sleep. Kullervo, Kullervo, your secrets we keep. Kullervo, Kullervo, swaddled in lies, raised to a life of groans and cries, took to his task with sorrowing sighs. Kullervo, Kullervo, death was your prize.
It was then that he took his blade in hand and began to hear it whispering to him. The one line that stands out to me is, "Whispered promises that boy made." Supposedly, this Kullervo we are following in this story is no longer a child. Are we meant to see this as a simple hallucination? Or is this another, trying to influence the young warrior? Was Kullervo somehow visited by the man in the wall? When we fight Kullervo in the prison, he is at one point flanked by two Liminists that wear the mask of the Vagabond, the personage that represents the man in the wall within Duviri. When we defeat these Vagabonds, they grab Kullervo, stab him multiple times in the back, in a way that is reminiscent of the stabbing of Julius Caesar on the floor of the Roman Senate. Did the vast indifference influence Kullervo to fall on his sword? Was this temporary death a part of his plan? In listening to these poems, we discover that Kullervo is the bastard son of one of the seven, an unnamed executor, and his mother, Archimedean Einike. As Orokin society is strictly divided into different social classes, we might assume that this romantic tryst was in some way unacceptable in Orokin society. Rather than claim Kullervo as their child, rather than killing the child outright, they chose to present the child as a Dax, alive and nearby, but unloved and alone. Kullervo thus served the Orokin faithfully until the day he deserted. Wandering back to the place of his birth, he discovered his true parentage from the oral histories of the commoners, and thus sought the station that the son of an executor ought to have by birthright. Having been rejected by his parents but now exposed as a bastard son, Kullervo's presence became a threat to the executor and Archimedean Einike's station. Their solution to this trouble, to keep their secret safe forever, was Ballas. Let Ballas make him into a Warframe. no speech, no memories before? Ballas, father of the Warframes, would be his true family, and Kullervo his ward. Yet when they found him, Kullervo Dax had already taken his own life. Just like the Kullervo of the Kalevala, he heard his sword whisper its desire to cut him down, just as he did so many others, because a sword cares not for who it cuts, it merely desires to cut flesh. This did not deter Ballas. He claimed Kullervo's body regardless, one more Warframe for the war against the sentients. As we have seen in The Sacrifice, Dax of particular noteworthiness were often chosen to become Warframes. These Dax were chosen for a variety of reasons, as we will see again when we discover the Abyss of Dagath storyline. Yet from the memories of Excalibur Umbra, it is apparent that the Warframes, more or less, do retain the memories and identities of who they were before. Earlier models like Excalibur Umbra, and as we learned from the Warden in the crime espionage segment, Kullervo was one of the first. The generation of Warframe made before the plan to unite them with the Tenno minds using transference, which would create the second dream. Kullervo thus willingly became an instrumental pawn in the Lotus's plan to overthrow the Orokin Empire. Rather than fight alongside the Tenno, he took this opportunity to finish his own plan, to take revenge on the unnamed executor and Archimedean Einike, then finally take his own life. Kullervo's life would not yet be forfeit, however. The power of the void, the power to create reflections of consciousness and probability, has the potential to create those once thought to be dead. The Warframe Kullervo's connection to the void, the memories of Ballas as he fell to Duviri and became the Warden, brought Kullervo back. Now, Kullervo, a new Warframe made in the forge of Duviri, is serving life sentences for his perceived crimes against the Orokin. That is, until the Drifter sets him free. Thank you for watching, and stay true.
I hear Vayne whisper sometimes. Don't worry, Vayne. They're just passing by.